Let me ask you something simple, but quietly powerful. When was the last time you actually felt your birthday? Not just acknowledged it, not just replied thanks to a few messages, but truly felt it. Felt it the way you did when you were a child. The way your heart used to thump with excitement at the thought of balloons and cake, and everyone's eyes turning toward you for one small sacred day. Now fast forward to adulthood. The same date comes and goes, but it feels like any other day. You wake up, maybe get a few notifications. Maybe your mom calls and then you move on. You tell people you don't really celebrate. You say you don't care. You tell people you don't really celebrate. You say you don't care. Because underneath that nonchalance, underneath that casual shrug, there's often a quiet story. People who treat their birthday like a normal day aren't cold or emotionless. In fact, often they're the most reflective ones. The ones who have learned to hide their expectations because disappointment taught them to. Psychologically, birthdays are emotional mirrors. They reflect how you feel about being alive and how you relate to attention and how comfortable you are being seen. When someone says, "I don't care about my birthday," what they're often saying is, "I don't need validation anymore." But sometimes what they mean is, "I stopped expecting it." There's a difference between maturity and emotional withdrawal. And birthdays have a strange way of showing us which one we've leaned into. Some people genuinely grow out of birthday excitement, not out of sadness, but out of peace. They've found meaning in ordinary days, in routines, in quiet moments. To them, joy isn't confined to a calendar date. They've learned that life itself is the celebration. But for others, the story's different. For them, birthdays are quietly complicated. They might bring up subtle anxiety, not because of age, but because of memory. Maybe birthdays remind them of moments when they felt forgotten. Or maybe they once cared too much and got hurt by unmet expectations. So instead of saying, "This year, I hope someone remembers," they say, "It's just another day." It's protection disguised as indifference. And that's where the psychology gets fascinating because it tells us how the mind adapts. When we feel repeated emotional letdowns, the brain begins to lower the bar. It's called emotional self-protection. You reduce anticipation to avoid disappointment. You teach yourself not to hope too loud. And while that might sound sad, it's actually a form of emotional intelligence, a way of maintaining balance and keeping your peace. The brain prioritizes stability over excitement when excitement has often led to pain. But here's the twist. Over time, that same self-protection can quietly dull joy. The heart that once shielded itself becomes a little too careful. You start walking through your own life like a guest at someone else's party. Polite, observant, but distant. Think about how many people smile and say, "Oh, I don't really do birthdays." But later they quietly replay the day in their mind, noticing who didn't message, who forgot, who said nothing at all. We all do it, even the ones who claim they don't care because caring is human. Even pretending not to care is a form of caring, just inverted, compressed, hidden under a shell of composure. Psychologists call this avoidant validation behavior. It's when you convince yourself you don't need recognition because part of you fears not getting it. And it often develops in people who learn that emotional needs were inconvenient, that it was easier to need nothing than to be disappointed again. So, when you meet someone who treats their birthday like any other day, don't assume they're emotionally detached. Sometimes they've just made peace with disappointment. They've traded excitement for control. But control has a cost, because underneath the calm surface lies an emotional truth we often bury. We all want to be seen. Not praised, but seen genuinely for who we are. There's something deeply symbolic about birthdays. They mark existence itself. The one day a year that belongs entirely to you. Not for what you've achieved, but simply because you exist. And for many people, that reminder brings mixed emotions. Some feel gratitude, others feel loneliness. Some feel both at once, like a strange cocktail of nostalgia and indifference. It's because birthdays, whether we realize it or not, remind us of time. They remind us how far we've come and how far we haven't. That's the silent psychological trigger most people overlook. For some, treating their birthday like a normal day is a way of staying grounded. It's their way of keeping time from feeling too heavy. If I don't make it a big deal, they think, it won't feel like another year slipping away. There's also something cultural about this shift. In childhood, birthdays are social milestones. They connect us to belonging. But in adulthood, that spotlight often feels strange or intrusive. Many adults quietly wrestle with wanting to be noticed, but wanting to avoid seeming needy. And that inner tug-of-war shows up subtly in how they treat their day. Because here's what happens beneath the surface of that shrug. When you grow up being the responsible one, the mind internalizes a message. Your joy comes second. You learn to downplay your needs to help others. You become the one who remembers everyone else's day, but forgets your own. And over time, your birthday starts to feel irrelevant. You're not even sure what you'd do if someone planned something big. It feels awkward, maybe even unnecessary or a burden. But the truth is that discomfort with being celebrated isn't humility. It's emotional fatigue. Deep down, many of these people still crave to feel seen, but not loudly. They don't want attention. They want understanding. They want someone to remember not just their date of birth, but who they've become. Because that's the paradox of emotional maturity. The more emotionally self-reliant you become, the harder it feels to receive love without suspicion. So birthdays become neutral zones, places where vulnerability would normally surface, but gets replaced by practicality and a quiet, it's fine. But behind that quiet tone, the mind is processing dozens of memories. Nostalgia for childhood, subtle sadness at lost connections, gratitude for survival, and a soft longing for the kind of joy that used to come effortlessly. That's what makes this psychology so universal across every culture. Even if you think you've outgrown birthdays, part of you still remembers what it felt like to be celebrated without hesitation. There's also a layer of temporal self-awareness. It's the moment you look back at the person you were a year ago and quietly measure the gap between who you wanted to be and who you are now. And sometimes that gap is uncomfortable to look at. That's why for some people, birthdays feel like mirrors, not parties. They highlight the silent distance between expectation and reality. And rather than face that reflection, people prefer to downplay the day. But it's not apathy, it's introspection. It's the human mind saying, give me space to process my own timeline. So if you've ever felt strange about your birthday, know that it's normal. You're not ungrateful or detached. You're simply aware. You're aware that time is moving. You're aware validation feels different now. You're aware that celebration means something deeper than cake and candles. Because birthdays are never really about age. They're about meaning. And the older we get, the more personal that meaning becomes. When you were a kid, your birthday was about the world recognizing you. When you're an adult, it's about you recognizing yourself. It's less about presence and more about presence in your own life. Less about who shows up and more about how much of you has shown up. That's the subtle shift most people don't talk about. And yet it explains everything about why we stopped making a big deal out of it. Because maybe we've stopped trying to be celebrated by the world and started trying to make peace with our own solitary journey. But even in that peace, there's an echo. A quiet voice that says, I hope someone still remembers. That's the paradox of emotional evolution. You can be content and still crave connection. You can be grounded and still miss the thrill of being seen. And that's okay. That's human. Because treating your birthday like a normal day doesn't mean you're numb. It means you've learned that joy isn't something to be scheduled. It's something you carry quietly every day in the small ways you show up. It's the softest kind of celebration, invisible but real. When someone treats their birthday like a normal day, they're not rejecting joy. They're redefining it on their own terms. They're saying, I no longer need the world's permission to feel good. And that shift marks one of the quietest forms of maturity. Somewhere along the road, the things which once made us feel special lose their glow. What starts to matter more is alignment. Did I live this year in a way that feels true? Did I grow? Did I show up when it mattered? For many, a birthday becomes less about noise and more about reflection. It's not that they don't care. It's that their definition of celebration has changed. Maybe their celebration now looks like a walk alone or a favorite meal. It's not the loud joy of balloons. It's the soft joy of solitude. And that's something our culture often misunderstands. We confuse quiet with emptiness, but silence can be sacred. When your values and your actions match, you experience fulfillment without validation. When your values and your actions match, you experience fulfillment without validation. They're no longer chasing the kind of celebration that's loud and performative. They've replaced it with something steady, self-trust. Still, there's a gentle truth worth remembering. Even the most self-sufficient souls still deserve to feel special once in a while. Not because they need validation, but because recognition nourishes the soul. The ones who treat their birthdays like any other day are often the quiet anchors. The ones who remember everyone else's milestones, but forget their own. Because even the independent hearts still need to be seen, not for what they do, but for who they are beneath the surface. So if your birthday feels ordinary, maybe that's not something to fix. Maybe it's something to honor as a sign of your own growth. You're saying, why, my life is already full enough to not need one day to be meaningful? That's not detachment. That's gratitude in disguise. Missing your younger self doesn't mean you've regressed. It means you remember innocence. Celebration doesn't always need confetti. Sometimes it just needs awareness. You don't have to make a wish. You already are one, a continuation of yourself.